Welcome to Talksicology, brought to you by Recovery Unplugged, the place where we talk about all things substance abuse, recovery, and mental health, with guests offering varying perspectives and viewpoints. Hosts Joseph Gordo and Jason Cabello share about their addiction and recovery and other serious subject matter through lighthearted yet candid conversation. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Seriously, thank you for coming, because this was a pretty a quick little intro that we had since we started talking the first day and to when you came on. And I know you have Dopey Wood coming up this weekend, so I know you got a lot of shit going on, so I appreciate your time.
I just love how clueless I am right now going into this episode. What is Dopey Wood? I want to know.
Dopey Wood is our California Dopey event that's happening on Saturday with a bunch of famous people and dopey people in California. So I'm flying to Los Angeles on Thursday, and it's like a mini, we do a Dopey convention every October, and this is kind of like a mini Dopey convention, and Jack Osborne is going to be in it. Rich Roll and Bob Forrest and Josh Klinghoffer from the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Pearl Jam.
Oh, man.
Pretty good.
I like Bob Forrest.
You guys should come.
You know what? Our actual Andrew Sossin is going to be in LA this weekend, who is our CEO and co-founder. So if we can't make it, maybe I'll tell him to pop over there.
Andrew loves meeting famous people.
He does.
Loves it.
Yeah.
It's like a hobby.
It looks like it's going to be jam-packed with people. So he's definitely welcome. He might have to stand, but he's definitely welcome.
Okay. I'll make that happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Dopey Podcast has, in the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months, I've been diving in deep. And so I'm kind of late to the game on it, but I'm kind of like that. Like, I'll wait for something, and then as soon as I am like, oh, this is cool, I'll just fucking go in. And you've been recording since 2016?
I really think we started in 2015, but we started releasing them in 2016.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, 9 long years.
I should have.
Long, arduous years.
It's one of those things, like, I should have, because I got clean in 2016. So that would have been perfect. And like summer of 2016 is when I got clean. It would have been a perfect, but hey, things happen the way they're supposed to happen. And once I think the Mark Maron episode might have been the first one that I listened to, just because I was going on a little bit of a kick. And then lately I've been just really diving into them, obviously starting with the people that I know, but then some of the other ones just kind of pop in, like if I'm working out or something.
You just zone in on the British guests first?
I did. What was the guy's name who sold a lot of drugs to Liam Gallagher? That one was great.
Simon Mason. He was good.
Yeah,
that was really good.
That was, I'm a bit of an audiophile, Joseph.
An Anglophile.
An Anglophile. Yeah.
What did I say?
You said audiophile.
Oh, yeah, an Anglophile.
You're an Anglophile. You're an Anglophile and an audiophile.
Yeah, exactly.
You're both. Yeah.
So yeah, growing up, I'm 50.
Dual diagnosis.
I'm 50 years old. So growing up in the 80s, I wanted to be like a soccer hooligan. Like I wanted to be like in the Jam.
Romper stomper.
Yeah, well, a little bit before that, but like I wanted to be in the fucking Jam or the Cockney Rejects until I found out that they were racist.
There's the Jam racist?
Not the Jam, the Cockney Rejects.
Okay, not the Jam. No.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I like that you're picking up on those deep cut music references.
So that's how. So yeah, let's. Well, before we get into all that stuff, because I know that you worked for MTV and stuff like that for a while, but let's go
talk about the 90s.
We'll talk about the 90s, but let's just get into who you are. To the couple, I'm sure this podcast is going to be heavy from your listeners, but to those like my mom who might not know who you are, why don't you
Number one
just
fan.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Dave?
My name is David. I'm from New York City. I was brought up in a very middle class Jewish household. Both my parents worked for the Board of Ed in the city of New York. What do you want to know?
Just ask me. Yeah, what was it like coming up for you in New York City? And me and you are about the same age, right? 50. Okay, yeah.
When's your birthday?
October 4th, 1974. For those of you trying to steal my identity.
I'm a few months older than you.
Okay.
And I grew up in Chelsea in Manhattan, and I got into this very, very, very competitive school when I was 4.
Oh, shit.
So the pressure was on when I was 4 And the
What
school
were
was on
you
the up
excelling in at the age of 4?
bullshitting. Like
Lots.
I was like an amazing manipulator at age
Oh,
3.
nice.
You could
I
color
was
like
manipulating.
a motherfucker.
Well, that's the thing. It's like in the city, and I probably in every city, there's a public elementary school that's free that like they only accept X amount of kids, and every parent wants their kid to
Yes.
be in that school. And in New York, it was the elementary school that I went to, and it was connected to a high school. And I think I was excelling in total like bullshit because once I became like an adolescent, they asked me to leave every year.
Right.
I never refused to leave. But it really defined my whole life. This school, I got in when I was 4. I stayed until I was 17.
Like,
I'm still friends.
Is it like Max Fisher from Rushmore? Like that was your have you ever seen that movie with Bill Murray and
Yeah, I'm getting all your references.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that. It was like what's a good example? It was like head of the class kind of thing.
Okay.
It was just nerds in Manhattan.
Right.
And I had to go from Chelsea, which is in the Lower West Side, to the Upper East Side every day. And there was like 50 kids, and it was like the late 70s. I'm the same age as you. It was
Yeah.
the late 70s. It was like it was pretty diverse. It was pretty cool, and it basically created the template of me now. I'd say it's very Sesame Street, very like pre-woke fucking 70s 80s business.
Yeah.
Like woke shit came out of the kids that went to my school.
Oh, okay. Understood. Yeah. So it was sort of like the pre-magnet program, but it was for yeah. So that makes sense. And God, I wanted to move to New York so bad when I was a kid because we would go out there. My parents were in the music business, so we would go out there when, my stepdad would be recording stuff. And God, I just wanted to live there so bad. So I'm very jealous of, pre-Giuliani New York. I'm just thinking of a kid like taking the subway to school and just sort of.
It was amazing. I was so happy to grow up in New York, and like normally my response would be, well, you're happy wherever you grow up. But I remember I would sit in classes in that school and be like, I'm so lucky to be here.
Right.
Like I would feel so lucky. And like I'm Jewish, and the school was like, I think mostly Asians and then Jews and then everybody else. So I felt I didn't feel like right now I live in Suffolk County, Long Island, and I'm the only Jewish person in my AA meeting, and everyone calls me Jewish Dave, and they say weird like anti-Semitic
Right.
shit. And I grew up not feeling like that, which was
Does
great.
that make you want to be like
Also-
more Jewish? Like throw in some Yiddish to your shares and stuff like that?
Sometimes it does. I have a sponsee who's like 63 years old, right?
Yeah.
And one day he started to call me Shlomo, right? He'd be like, "Hey, Shlomo," and I'd be like, and at first I was like, "This is him trying to be loving,"
Right.
but then as it went on, more and more people were making weird Jewish references to me. And I had never experienced like the otherness, being other than what everybody else was. So one day he's like, "Hey, Shlomo." I was like, "Dude, you got to stop calling me Shlomo." And he goes, "Why?" I said, it just needs to stop.
Yeah.
I can't handle this feeling. And then like everyone in my meeting is 90% is Irish Catholic. And if they're not Irish Catholic, they're Italian Catholic. Like I live in a place where Trump, cops, carpenters, like firemen all come together as one. Everybody's got a pickup truck with like multiple Trump flags and American flags and back of the blue and all that stuff. And like my daughter is half Jewish, and she's easily the most Jewish kid in her grade.
Oh man.
But like I don't mind it. I just don't like it when I'm Jewy Dave. I don't want to be Dopey Dave. I don't want to be Jewy Dave. I don't want to I just have this weird kind of insecurity about being pointed at with this thing. But I was at a meeting today, right? And this guy was sharing. He goes, "Billy the Liar connected me with Danny the Fireman, and everyone's got these great nicknames. And I don't really want to be Dave the Jew, but Dave the Jew beats Jewy Dave. Dave the Jew, I think
That is better.
maybe I think I could settle in that."
Well, I feel like
But
AA culture is a lot like, because I'm Mexican, right? And like in Mexican culture, right, your nickname will be the thing you are most insecure about, right? So like if you've got a gimpy leg, well, when I first got sober, my wife, girlfriend at the time, gave me a fedora for our first Valentine's Day. This was like 2008. 2009, right? I guess it would have been 2009.
Little brim, big brim.
Uh,
Was it a little brim or a big brim?
It wasn't the tiny. It was like a medium brim, but it was like a houndstooth pattern that was very
okay.
And I rocked that.
Did you
fedora.
put some stink on it, like lean it over the eye a little bit?
It depended on my mood. But so in Kerrville, where I got sober at the time, there was two Josephs. It was me and this other guy, and so there was gay Joseph
and Schnazzy Joseph
and Joseph with the hat.
That's not bad. Joseph with the hat.
Joseph with the hat's pretty good. I'd take that.
I could live with Dave the Jew. Maybe I should introduce that and be like, if you need to call me. Do you want to hear the funniest thing?
Yeah.
There's a guy in my meeting from fucking Boston, but he works in New York City now, and they call him New York City Dave.
and he probably fucking hates it. He probably hates that.
No, he loves it. He loves it because he loves how upset it makes me.
Oh yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's just one of those things. But the coolest thing there were two really cool things about my school besides the fact that it was all nerds and Jews and Asian people. But the coolest thing about the school was like, that's how I got into MTV is like when you're in 11th grade, you basically earn enough credits to graduate. So when you're in 12th grade, you have to get an internship. Mm-hmm. And we wound up getting an internship at MTV. But the really coolest thing, I started working at MTV. I mean, I worked at MTV for like a year. I worked at MTV in 1992. 91, 92.
So it's like 120 minutes Matt Pinfield era.
That was pre-Matt Pinfield.
Kurt Loder and Kennedy and
Kurt Loder. Yeah. It was Kurt Loder. It was the first season of The Real World. We would hang out with Kurt Loder, and he would just smoke weed and listen to the Harder They Come record over and over and over again. Like, we met the Real World people, and it was, I mean, like, I went to a record store signing with Slaughter, sitting on the floor of their limo, getting so car sick that when we arrived at Tower Records in New Jersey, I just threw up the second the door opened, and they were all wasted, and I was totally sober. But it was just being so car sick in this horrible early 90s metal limo. But the really coolest thing about my high school is there was a tradition of this game called Killer. And Killer was this game, right, where probably 50 kids all buy these plastic tracer guns. And tracer guns are these guns that shoot like plastic discs. They're plastic, bright colored guns that shoot plastic discs. And the 50 kids team up into groups of 7 or 8. And basically for 2 weeks, 24 hours a day, you're in hunting 2 other teams, and 2 other teams are hunting you. And all of New York City, anywhere on earth, is in boundaries except for the block of the school. And the only time you can't be killed is at lunchtime. You're safe at lunch wherever you go. Otherwise, on the subways, at home, whatever, people can come and gun you down. And we played 2 weeks every year, and it was the coolest thing ever.
Do they still do this?
I think they do. I got suspended for playing. Like, there was an urban legend that some kid pulled his tracer gun on the subway platform, and a cop pulled his gun and almost shot the kid because the kid had painted his gun black. So Killer was banned, but that was like my favorite thing about our school, besides my friends.
What kind of music were you into when you were a teenager, like leading up into when you were working at MTV?
I was such a fucking nerd. I liked classic rock music. I liked hip hop music. Because you kind of couldn't not like it. It was ubiquitous, like It Takes Two and Yo MTV Raps. And like, I was totally plugged into hip hop world. But in our high school, there was a ska band when I was in 10th grade and they were in 11th grade. And I joined the ska band when I was in 11th grade, and we got a record deal and we played shows every week. And like, so I became indoctrinated into the incredible nerdy world of ska. And it's usually like one of my big regrets before I go to sleep at night, which was, why did that have to happen to me, where ska defined me?
No,
in my high school
Dave,
year.
look, ska is amazing. Look, ska is that genre.
Well, what wave of ska
Ska is
are
like
we
a moped.
talking?
Ska is like a moped.
Right. I
My
agree.
wave,
You know?
the 1992 wave of ska in New York City was not a horrible wave,
Was
but
that
it
like
was
dance
bands
hall
nobody heard.
crashers and stuff like that, or?
That was the tail end. The bands that were really big when I was in it was a band called the Scofflaws
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh,
a band
Scofflaws are
called
great. Yeah.
Mephistopheles.
Mephistopheles.
Was the greatest ska band in the post first wave. It was
Right.
the greatest. So we would play shows with them. We were not great. We were called the Percolators. We were not great. But Mephistopheles was, and
Yeah,
you'd
they
go
were
to a
good.
club and it would be like 100, 200 skinheads from New York City, all dressed like they're from England, wearing
Right,
Fred
right.
Perrys and shaved heads and Doc Martens and the whole thing. And you feel like you're in something very special. And then that's when the wackiness kind of showed up.
I
And
was gonna
the
say,
coolness
like-
of ska was
Like
yeah.
93 is where it kind of turn a little bit sour, where it started just being a little bit much. But yeah, like leading up to that stuff, like Operation Ivy on the West Coast and all the stuff from
Totally.
that's a great. And that was the scene that I was kind of hanging out with too, like during those years, like right when it started to get a little bit like, oh, some of this a little bit fucking wacky, but I'm here for it. It beats what else was going on out there. So ska music is your ska Dave at this point, and then from there, where do things go? Did the job at MTV sort of open your horizons a little bit, or
It did. We basically got an internship at MTV, and as soon as we got there, I was like, how do we get on TV? How do we get on TV? How do we get on TV? And I just I was with one of my very best friends, and we would go from like decision maker to try to get on the show we were working on. We were working on it was a high school magazine show called Like We Care. And I would just talk shit. Cause like when I was 3, I was this big manipulator that got into this fancy school. When I was 17 at MTV, I was the same manipulator just trying to get on MTV. And I met like the guy who created Unplugged, and we became pretty close at the time. His name is Alex Coletti. Now I don't think Alex Coletti I wound up burning him years later, and I tried to make an amend, and I never got through to make an amend. So it's interesting. But he created Unplugged, and like we met Kurt Loder,
MTV
and
Unplugged, not Recovery Unplugged, just to be clear.
Yeah, that's ironic. MTV Unplugged, not I'm sure he's a big fan of Recovery Unplugged.
I'm sure he is.
Alex
he likes
Coletti's actually a big fan of the show, so he'll probably hear this and then reach out to you to hear.
I can find Alex. I'm sorry. I fucking fucked you over. I was high. I apologize. We wound up on that show. It lasted for about a year, but it totally informed what I wanted to do. Before that, I think I had a daydream that I wanted to be a talk show host. Like my mother would listen to the radio on top of the fridge, and I would think, oh my God, that sounds so relaxing. Or then I would watch Regis Philbin and be like, oh, I'd like to do that.
Yeah.
And then when we got to MTV, I was like, let's try to do this.
Same here. As a kid, it was like Johnny Carson and then into David Letterman. I'm just like, oh, this guy, he doesn't even have to do this stuff. He just gets the people who do the stuff and then like asks them questions. Like what a dream job that is.
Yep.
So one through line that I'm seeing here, and it's one of those like if you spot it, you got it thing. It's like the junkie with an angle before you were a junkie. So always an angle, getting through to things, which is not a bad trait if you're using it for good and not evil, which I've found in my recovery. But when you take that sort of, let's call it a superpower, and then mix it with, the throes of addiction, it'll keep you going, keep you high for a long time. But man, it's like, what a way to burn bridges. It's just, I remember I would have friends that would just be like, God, you always have a fucking angle. Like you'll talk to me for 2 hours before I'll find out what the angle is, like how you're trying to get over on me. But that was my MO. Like always, like, who can I talk to? Who can I get money from? Who can I get this from? A ride, whatever it is.
Well, see, I hear that and I think about like that, not to get super 12-steppy, right? But like selfish self-centeredness, that's the root of our dilemma, right? Yeah. Like that mindset of like, whatever scenario I'm in, what can I take from it?
Right.
And that could be like, I walk into your home and I just kind of scan what are the valuables that will fit in my pocket, right? Or it can be, can I hit you up for $1 or $10 or whatever, or can I manipulate myself onto TV?
Yeah,
You
or
know?
into this amazing school in New York City.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ska Dave becomes MTV Dave, and then how does MTV
Yeah.
Dave end up becoming drug addict Dave?
Well, I think it happened more through Ska Dave. I think it was a mix of Ska Dave and MTV Dave that turned me into drug addict Dave. It was like we had a studio. We had a rehearsal studio in Manhattan. There was a classic place called Giant Studio where you could rent a studio 24/7 for like $50 a month. And like all the hardcore bands and oi bands and all weird New York City bands
Right.
would be in there. And it was like the coolest place. We shared a studio with a band that actually got kind of big called the Slackers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we split the $50 with the Slackers because we couldn't afford it. But I remember that summer I started smoking weed heavy. Like I remember we went to some like West Indian parade in Brooklyn and I smoked weed and I was like, oh, I really like this. And then one of the guys in our band wound up going to Columbia University and I went up to meet him and he had some stoner drug dealer there and I was smoking weed with that guy and he was like, I'll give you an ounce of weed. You sell it to your friends and come bring me the money. And he gives me the ounce of weed and he's giving me the ounce of weed. And I remember looking at the ounce and I'm going, why? I'm never going to see you again.
Right.
Why are you giving me this ounce of weed? It didn't even, not even for a second was I like, oh, I'm going to make this guy money. The second he handed it to me, I was like, I'm robbing this motherfucker.
Yeah.
And I would steal from record stores. I never stole from a person before then. And I felt so proud of it. I think that could have been a telltale.
Yeah.
And from there, I just went full on stoner. I went full on stoner. I went to college. I started taking acid. I smoked weed probably every day from freshman year college till I was 41. If I wasn't in an institution.
What was the time period before the first time you smoked weed until it was an everyday thing?
I think I did acid before I smoked weed. I did acid in junior year of high school at a Grateful Dead show. And then I didn't touch anything. I drank a couple times, but alcohol really didn't jibe with my system. Like I would get violently ill and I would get uncomfortable and it didn't make me feel good. So I didn't drink. But I when I smoked weed at some parties, I was like, I can do this instead of drink.
Yeah.
And that was good. And then when I got to college, I was so alone because like that school that I had gone to since I was 4, I developed like this real codependency on these kids. And when I left them, I felt that defining alcoholic thing where I was totally uncomfortable in my skin, totally alone, totally afraid. And I joined a band in college. It was a soul band. It was like the Blues Brothers. It was a 13-piece soul band. I played harmonica and sang, and I started smoking weed in that band, and that just defined me.
Okay.
From then on. So I mean, like I came up totally, in love with music, and so much insecurity and low self-esteem that I never thought I could be a real musician, even though I played music, played in bands. And then the second I was smoking weed, I was like, I just want to stay high. And I fucked with music, but I never like identified as a musician.
Right. And you think that's like sort of imposter syndrome. Like, yeah, I'm a musician who's playing in these bands, but I'm not a musician. I'm just the guy who can hold a beat or hold the harmonica and, play a little bit. And
I was good at harmonica. I was good, but there's a space between good and really good. And I never went to really good.
Okay.
I stayed in good. And then I wrote a bunch of songs and I got into doing drugs. I got into doing drugs and I got into art. And when I went to college to study television. But as soon as I started studying television, it seemed like a technical school. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
it was
yeah.
like I was learning how to splice audio and shit. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And I would get stoned and I would go sit in a dark room and watch some teacher show us slides of paintings and explain what the painter was trying to teach us. And it was very like psychedelic and spiritual and philosophical. And I was like, oh, I like this. And then I kind of like had the same imposter syndrome around art that I had around music. We wound up getting busted with a bunch of weed at Ithaca College. And I applied to go to a state school in New York called Purchase, which was an art school. And they kicked us out of Ithaca. But at the same time, me and my friend had gotten accepted to this art school, and we transferred without anybody finding out that we had gotten arrested with this weed. And in the art school, like, that's when I first did heroin. That's when there was a lot more pills. That's when we were selling acid, and it kind of escalated from there.
The artsy kids.
Yeah.
Artsy kids, man. No, but I hear a lot of myself, and like, as you're talking, right? Like, you know, some of that ism before the alcohol stuff, right? Like, you know, the imposter syndrome, that never feeling like fully a part of, right? Always, like, for me, being hyper aware of when I'm different than everybody else, you know, or like some of that terminal uniqueness, right? Like, I feel so different from other people. And even like when you're talking about, like, you know, I never identified as a musician, right? Like, I can play like 3 instruments decently, and I can fake it on another 4, and I don't consider myself a musician, you know? And like, I'm an executive in a healthcare company, but I don't think I know what the fuck I'm doing. You know, like, I've been married 16 years or 13 years, with her 16, but like, I don't feel like I'm the best husband or as good. You know what I mean? Like, just, there's no area of my life where I can be like, yeah, like, I am this and I am good at this.
You know you're a good parent. You do. You could lie to me,
see,
but you know that you're a good parent.
So objectively, like factually, right? Just like I can play an instrument and you can play an instrument, like objectively, yes. But in here,
okay,
it doesn't feel like that all the time. You know?
So that's something you could relate to, Dave, that feeling of
100%. And it's sad. It's like, to make the decision to not feel like that, to make the decision to know that we're all the same, and still be separated. It's such a crazy mindfuck at all times. I mean, I love making my podcast, and I think I'm really good at it, but I always bullshit people and say I have this stupid podcast. You know, I never really owned that it's good to people. I in my heart, I love it. It's like the love of my life besides my family. But I can totally relate to what you're saying.
Yeah.
So,
and objectively, he has a good podcast, right?
Yeah.
You have a good podcast. One of the greatest podcasts in history did a podcast episode about your podcast. Like, that is objectively like, you know?
No,
I get it.
I feel like comfortable, and this is maybe, you know, the borderline between self-hatred and arrogance. I think I have a great podcast. I love my podcast, and I put so much love into it. So I feel comfortable with loving my podcast.
Okay, good. So can I assume then that, you know, if you're anything like me, that the first time you took an opiate, all that stuff that we were talking about, the not fitting in, the feeling a little bit different, feeling imposter, did you get that feeling like all that stuff disappeared when you first had your first real opiate experience? No.
Not the first time. The first time, it was actually with a kid who was in a pretty famous band. And he grew up with my roommate, and he busted out all this heroin, and I was game to do anything. So I sniffed some heroin and I got sick.
Just threw up the whole time.
I hooked up with some girl that I didn't want to hook up with, which that's the only time I could ever say that I woke in my life. And I threw up and I woke up sick, and I was like, I just want to smoke weed. I don't want to deal with that. But the second time, 100%.
Yeah.
In my brain, automatically, as soon as you said it was like a kid in a band and I'm at an art school, I'm like, Julian Casablanca.
No, he's a bit younger.
I know, but in my brain, that's what it is now.
But no, like, same with me. So first time I ever did it, I fucking threw up for like 5 hours straight. Just like, how the fuck?
Right.
And then the second time, it was like, I'm going to assume it was like a 7.5 milligram pill because it wasn't too much. And then I was just like, I'm in fucking trouble. Like, this is how I want to feel every single day for the rest of my life.
I never puked. The first time I did heroin, I shot it because I was like, I'm going to do it. You know, if I'm doing this, I'm doing this, right?
What was that? How does that happen?
I grew up in a border town where Mexican.
What town?
Laredo, Texas.
Wow, Laredo, Texas.
Yeah. There's songs about it.
Tell us the story. Just for a second, tell us the story of the first time you shot heroin. Please.
So I was 18, had my first apartment away, which, you know, was the kind of the party house because I was the first kid with an apartment, right? And this girl who was a stripper came to a party and never left. She moved in and she was my girlfriend. She was in recovery from heroin, right? She wasn't like in recovery, but like she didn't do heroin anymore. And I had a good friend who she would dabble. She would dabble with the heroin. And so one day she calls me and she's like, hey, like I kind of feel like doing heroin. I know your girlfriend used to do heroin. Does she know where to get any? So I take these two girls and we go to we go buy some syringes and we go buy some heroin.
How exciting was that?
That shit happened all the time back then.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I
Like
guess.
we were always on some fucked up drug errand adventure or whatever, right? You know,
Drug errand.
Yeah.
That's
what we did.
Perfect.
I watched one of them do it and then I'm like, you know what? Like fucking I took y'all to go do might as well try it. I'm gonna try it one time and see what's up. And I remember my friend tried to stick me and it didn't go the first time. And I remember looking at her and saying like, this isn't going to fuck up my life, is it? Like those exact words. And she was like, no, I promise.
Oh, shit.
And then she did it. And I remember.
She lied to you.
Yeah. She didn't know. We were 18. What do we know about anything? And I remember my first thought being like, that's it? Like I remember feeling not impressed with heroin.
Do you think they gave you the proper dose or you think they gave you some wash?
No, I mean, I watched them cook it up.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, with
Still though, 18 and shooting is fucking crazy.
Yeah.
First time. That's crazy.
Yeah. And and then I was off to the races for 6 years, but I got sober young.
You did get sober young. Yeah.
But yeah, I remember not being impressed with it, but it very quickly took me down. You know what I mean? Like within 6 months of not even.
So what was the first time? So the first time didn't do much. So did that just sort of pique your interest to be like, I need to see what the big deal about this shit is?
Well, at the time I was really into coke. And I was spending a lot of money on coke. And so heroin became the way to stop doing coke. You know, it was like, okay, we've done 2 8 balls.
Economic.
I'm going to do a dime here and kind of be cool.
Yeah.
And then I remember one day, that went on for about a month or two. Then I remember one day I was at work. And I was, feeling kind of cruddy. My bones kind of ached. And I was like, I think I'm going to go home. I'm feeling sick. And I got home and there was, some junkie friends hanging out. And I was like, yeah, man, I think I'm getting sick, whatever. And they were like, you're dope sick, bro.
Yeah.
But we called it malia. Malia was like the word for dope sick. And I was like, oh, I guess that's it.
And then, okay. So Dave, for you, it becomes, you do it. And then, first times feeling like shit, you hook up with a girl you didn't want to. When does the second time come to where, or however many times later, to where it gave you that feeling that you chased for a long time?
Basically, that first time I was in school, and then I didn't do it again. And I didn't really. I did coke here and there. I didn't like it. Coke didn't hit me. I would do psychedelics whenever I could get them. And then I graduated college. I wound up getting these weird jobs and just smoking tons of weed and living as this stoner kind of whatever. I had this very intense relationship and I got a job working at a different TV company. It was connected to Broadway Video, the company that makes Saturday Night Live.
Oh, yeah.
And my girlfriend called me one day and she broke up with me. She had cheated on me with somebody in Michigan. She went on a trip to Michigan and cheated on me, and I was devastated.
And she broke up with you?
Yeah. Well, she called me to tell me she's not coming back.
Oh, shit.
So she made the cheating permanent.
Yeah.
I don't even know. It was with some hippie glass blower in Michigan, and it destroyed me.
Who's this?
And I don't know. I always called him an Asian hippie glass blower in Michigan, but she always tells me he wasn't Asian. But for some reason in my head at the time, he was Asian. Not that matters at all.
So
anyway,
your world as you know it crumbles at that moment.
And I had just gotten an apartment Like I grew up in low income housing in Manhattan.
Mhm.
And when I was 11, my mother put me on a list to get an apartment. And when I was 22, I got the apartment, and it was a studio on 24th Street and 8th Avenue. And it cost $300 a month. And I had gotten a job as a PA, a production assistant for this television company. And I went to the interview, and the producer hired me, and he goes, "Listen, I know you think you've done a lot of drugs, but I'm telling you, I've done more." And I was like, "Okay, man,
What a
whatever."
weird thing to
And like,
say in an interview.
that's what I said. I said, "That's a very weird thing to say." But he was a producer. He was producing a stoner cooking show called Half Baked, where the chef, it was before the movie Half Baked came out. And Half Baked, the movie, actually had to pay them 10 grand to use the name. But so fucking they hire me to be a production assistant, and immediately they know that I'm this ridiculous stoner. So they hire me to keep track of how high the host is. Like, is he high enough? Is he too high? Do I have to give him more weed, or do I have to give him a sandwich kind of thing? And I get this job. I get this job at as a location scout. So I go to Indiana to cover a school where there's, because the company I worked for was a college cable network, and all the programming was for college kids. And they were doing a talk show, and they needed a location scout. And when my girlfriend had broken up with me, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit.
No, you're
When
fine.
my girlfriend had broken up with me, my friend asked me if he can move in with me. And I was like, sure. And he was this crazy stoner kid that I had met in college, and his name was Todd. And I was like, as long as you pay for weed and drugs, you can stay at my apartment. So he started delivering weed around the city and hooking up with coke dealers everywhere, because he was like a bike courier that would
Right.
deliver weed. And he found every coke spot from the doorman of the buildings. And so I go on this trip to Indiana to find kids to be on this talk show. Todd is in my apartment in Manhattan. And when I come home from the trip, my apartment is full of kids from my college with Todd and some drug dealer that I hadn't met. And it turned out the drug dealer he was running a different kind of courier situation in Manhattan, where he would bring every drug, coke, heroin, GHB, ecstasy, and he would deliver that around Manhattan. And Todd had found him, and somehow all these kids knew that Todd had this coke hookup. So they all bought coke. I walk in from this trip like, what the fuck is this? And me, again, being that manipulator, I go to the drug dealer and I go, listen, you're making all this money from my apartment. What are you going to give me? And he takes out 2 bags of heroin and he drops them on the table. And me and Todd split the 2 bags. We snorted them. And that's when the opiate hit me in the way that I never will forget. That love, like that deep love, that fucking, it was like that, like, it was like Sunday night, we were watching The Simpsons. We were wasted, and the morning after, I was still wasted, and I was like, holy shit. And that's when it started. And it took about a year of fucking around with it. Todd actually left town because he was strung out. I had turned my production assistant job into an actual producer job and a talk show host job, where I was producing a music show. And I got to interview like Ween and Beanie Man and KRS-One and Bob Weir and all these people. And it was when I got that job, I was like, I can afford to do heroin, and
Every
I really
day.
yeah, that's exactly.
And how long did it take before it was like a serious habit?
It was like a year, because I was very, very, very deliberate to not do it every day, like to do it once a week, and then do it twice a week, and then do it a little bit more. I remember actually saying, like, not doing it, and then saying, I'm doing it every day. Like, obviously the Velvet Underground song Heroin, where he says, I have made a big decision. Like, I made a big decision. I was not stopping. And from there, it was just, that's when it hit balls to the wall. And it didn't last very long. It lasted I went balls to the wall probably for 2 years, which is pretty good, but I had very little rent and I made a lot of money.
Okay.
But I made it 2 years, balls to the wall in Manhattan.
So when you talk about that moment of like when the opiate clicks, I always think of that as like the Vincent Vega moment, right? Like from Pulp Fiction, when he fixes
Sure.
up and he's driving, and like in all of cinema, I think that shot of what's the dude's real name?
John Travolta.
John Travolta, like driving to go pick up Uma Thurman. I'm like, that's the feeling right there.
I still have a hard time. Like, that's probably the only piece of cinema that to this day, if I watch it, I'm still kind of like,
Get a little queasy.
No, not queasy, like romantic. Like, man, that's a
little euphoric recall.
You definitely euphoric recall.
Dude, I'm feeling fucking romantic right now just from hearing you talk about this.
Well, so my question, I guess, is always, when is the first time you remember thinking, fuck, I have a problem here?
I don't even remember. It was so long ago. I don't remember when it was like, fuck, I have a problem. I just started doing the math. And you also need to understand, like, I probably started doing heroin when I was 23 or 24, and I didn't stop doing it until I was 36.
Yeah.
So when I was 23 or 24, I was like, how am I going to keep doing this? And how am I? Because I was making a lot of money producing TV. I was paying $300 a month. And I couldn't afford to pay the $300 a month. Like that's how bad it was. And I didn't buy nice clothes or I have a car or do anything besides heroin.
Right.
Like I spent all of my money on it. I wound up, I don't know when I knew I had a problem. I just knew it started to show up that I couldn't afford it and I got sick.
Yeah.
I got sick. I got my Malia. And I wound up, Malia, is that the right word?
Malia.
Yeah. And that was like one of the biggest turning points of my life. I had the option to tell my parents. I went and I checked into a free detox in Manhattan. One of the first of many, many, many free detoxes in Manhattan. And I wasn't going to go to work on Monday. And I was like, and nobody knew where I was. And I was like, do I call work? Or do I call my parents? And I decided to call my parents, and which let work fire me. I had a contract with the company, and they were like, "Well, he's not coming to work. We can finally fire this junkie freak." And my parents came to see me, and it was really, like they were dressed for the theater and smelling of perfume, and I'm wearing fucking hospital scrubs and shit.
Right.
I think that's when it was like I might have a problem. But I also remember talking to the counselor then, and she was like, you're going to be fine. She was like, you're young enough, you can get out of this. And her telling me that, I left and I used like that day.
You're like, there's more time. I can do this for a while longer.
Exactly.
So, when does recovery click for you? Because you said multiple detoxes. I know this.
Never.
I know you started the
Yeah.
podcast right around when you actually like got sober permanently. So, and if my math is right, you were 41 when that happened. And you were talking about doing heroin until you were 36. So, there's a process there clearly to getting you to really buying into doing something different.
How many times in treatment? Do you remember?
Less than Jason.
No, I mean, I was probably in 20 detoxes between New York and LA. Like every free detox multiple times a year, every year. I went to probably 4 28-day programs and millions of fucking treatments. As many as I could go to. I didn't keep track.
How often were you going? How often were you going at this point to at least detox? Every other month?
I mean, like, no, I would say between 2 and 5 times a year.
Okay.
Depending on the year. And there was a period between 29 and 35 where I had a girlfriend who totally took care of me, and I didn't work, and I lived with her in Los Angeles, and she took care of me, and and sobriety was not a blip on the horizon. I didn't have any interest in it. I didn't know anything about it. I never wanted to not do drugs. I hated that heroin had me as such a slave, and I wanted to be a stoner again. I wanted to have that laissez-faire stoner life. And I didn't find sobriety until I was 41. It wasn't near me. I tried, but I didn't want it. I didn't want it in the slightest. I wanted to get high. It all changed when it changed the minute before we started Dopey, and it changed because at that point, I had met a woman, my mother had died, I had a child, and basically she found out that I had relapsed on heroin and she left me. And that was like where shame actually was meaningful to me. Like I didn't have shame really my whole life around drug addiction. It wasn't until my daughter's mother took my daughter and moved away and I couldn't visit them without my father. That was that was like a real sobering moment.
I think what resonates with me is that feeling of, oh shit, it's not about me trying to figure out how to use successfully anymore or to do things my way anymore. Like I need to get my shit together. Was that sort of the last time?
What had happened was she had taken custody from me. She had told me she was going to give me a hair follicle test to show 365 days until I could get 2 days a week with my daughter without my dad. And I did that. But I had a few drinks that year, and I wasn't a drinker. I like went on dates and had a few drinks and was dishonest about it and wasn't in sobriety. And I was desperate to get my family back together. And me and my daughter's mother and my daughter, they agreed to go on a vacation with me to Amish country. And my daughter's mother drinks and would take benzos casually, whatever. And that night, I went into her bag and stole some Xanax from her. And the next day she found out and she went crazy. And then we went then we like tried to reconcile again. And she found out I was taking benzos again. And she's like, that's it. You're losing custody again. You need to get another 365 days. And we're not reconciling. And we were pretty close to reconciling at that point. And I was desperate. I was like writing her letters, begging her to let me smoke pot. And and I kind of had like my version of a spiritual awakening one night in August where I was writing her an email like, just let me smoke pot. I could be a good dad. I could be a good partner. I can handle my life just with weed. And I looked at my hands and I was like 41. You know, I was subletting an apartment on the Lower East Side. I was a waiter and this was the best I had ever lived. And I'm sitting here begging her to let me smoke weed. And I was like, I got to try something. And I went to an AA meeting the next morning and some kid there getting 10 years. The kid looked like you, like covered in tattoos and beautiful. And he was celebrating 10 years at 28. And I went up to him and I was like, dude, you're fucking annoying. Because he was so successful, so young, so attractive, 10 years. And he's like, how much time do you have? And I was like, I have nothing. And he's like, well, did you use today? And I was like, no. And he goes, well, maybe today will be your first day. And I was like, you're annoying. And it was my first day. She totally changed my life, changed my fucking life. And I found a meeting that met 7 days a week at 7:30 in the morning. And I sat there and I had this epiphany that I was 41. And if I was lucky, I would live to be 82. And at 41, half my life is gone and I have very little to show for it. And what would 41 years of recovery look like? And I got into it and I took suggestions and things changed.
Guest of your show, host of Hell Has an Exit, Brian Alzate, he brought H&I meetings to the one county-run rehab that I went to 19 times. He brought H&I meetings into there, and he was the first person who was like younger, good looking. He could tell a fucking story and people were cracking up. Like, this guy is, do you know Brian? He used to run United Recovery, I think.
I know the podcast.
Okay. So yeah, he was from South Florida, from Broward County, and he would bring the H&I meetings in there. And I just remember seeing him and being like, this guy's so fucking cool. Like, this guy's talking about smoking crack out of a fucking mechanical pencil that his mom bought him and shit. And I'm just like, I want to be like this guy.
Dave, you remind me. I don't know. I see so much of like my story reflected in your story, right? Like, I never wanted to get sober. I just wanted to find a way to not do heroin. Is the way I would describe it to people, right? And I would try to come up with systems, right? Like, I'll do Xanax, or only do heroin once every 2 weeks, or I'll snort it instead of shooting it, or I'll boof it, or I'll do it like this, or what, and I ran through all the combinations, all the different systems. I ran through them real fast before it was like, okay, I guess I can't do anything.
Yeah. So starting the podcast a little bit, how long were you sober before you did your first recording of, was it called Dopey at the time? Like the first episode?
Yeah, it was called Dopey. Basically, I had done a show at Katz's. I work at this very famous deli in New York City called Katz's, and I was a waiter. And I did a show, like a web series there called The Last Jewish Waiter. And I like hustled to get people to write about it. It was about a waiter who hates waiting tables and he wants to have a talk show. So he does the talk show while he waits tables. And I got a lot of different magazines to write about it. And Chris was really interested in like being famous and doing something notable. And I was smoking weed at the time, and Chris was sober, and he was like, oh, we should do something. And I was like, I don't know. And then when I got sober, or when I got sober, I started talking to Chris a lot because he had relapsed so many times and he was so into AA.
And you guys were in treatment. You guys went to treatment together.
Years before, we went to treatment in 2011.
Okay.
At a place in Connecticut called Mountainside, and we had both relapsed over and over from there to 2015. But when we were in August of 2015, I think Chris had a year and a half, and I had just gotten sober. And he was like, well, we should find something to do. And I had another friend who had suggested doing a podcast about drug stories. And I said to Chris, maybe we should do a podcast about drug stories, because Chris had the craziest drug stories I had ever heard. And he was like, okay, what's a podcast? And I was like, I don't know. And he came to my house, and I was such a big fan of the Howard Stern show that I knew how to do it, even though I never thought about doing it. I was like, wait a second, I could do this. And we set up a computer. We didn't buy any gear, and we talked into the mic on the computer. And we did that for 50 episodes. And we had made a pact that we were never going to stop doing it, even though we stopped doing everything else we'd ever done.
Right.
And he would come down. He lived in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and he would drive to Manhattan once a month, and we would record 4 episodes and eat a bunch of Vietnamese food and buy a bunch of chocolate, talk a bunch of shit, and then he'd leave. And we did that until he died. He died, I want to say 2.5 years later, and I kept doing the show after he died. And basically with This American Life, like I had pitched This American Life on The Last Jewish Waiter, and they passed. And I had pitched This American Life on Dopey, and they passed. And then I was like, I know they're going to want to tell the story of Chris's death. Yeah. And they did.
And they did.
Most of the people who are familiar with you will be familiar with you losing your co-host, Chris, to a relapse.
Chris was the first person you knew who died of an overdose.
No. It was, the guy who moved into my apartment. And
Todd was the first guy. So Chris was the second guy. But, I've been working in treatment centers, for 15 years. And back in the day, it was, you'd hear about a couple overdoses a year. And in current America, right, I hear about a couple a week, most weeks, right? So I wanted to hear a little bit about how like your journey has been with like getting comfortable with the loss of life that we kind of have been forced to get comfortable with in the rooms of recovery.
I don't know if I'm comfortable with it. I think I have a lot of anger around it and numbness, and then some acceptance. At the bottom of it, I think there's some acceptance with it, but I don't feel comfortable with it. It's we've lost a lot of people in our community because our community is heroin addicts, fentanyl addicts. It's like, how could we not? And like, I had never lost anybody when I was using, and we had lost a couple people before Todd died. And then after Chris died, we lost a bunch of people. And this last summer, we lost this woman named Annie, who was very big in our community. And the summer before, we had lost this guy, Brian, who was very, very big in our community. And the summer before, we had lost this woman named Colleen. And it's like every year we're losing somebody. I don't have comfort in it. I have numbness. Anger, and I guess acceptance, because what the fuck am I going to do? What the fuck can you do except do your program, work in your healthcare, make your podcast. I'll make my podcast, help as many people as you can. But in the end, there's nothing we can do about it.
I think that's what I've gained the most about talking to you since our first conversation a few weeks back, is that, the podcast is entertaining. You do great interviews. You're truly talented at interviewing people and getting them to talk about things and staying on track and working your way back into stories. But what I most got out of talking to you is that most every time I've talked to you, you're on your way back from a meeting or something like that. So while you're doing this thing that helps other people, you keep your recovery completely separate. It seems to me, at least, and take it very seriously and don't let the two sort of, really meld too much. So how is it? How do you toe the line between working a 12-step program, and I'm sure you're pretty, into the steps and the traditions and all that, to then going on somewhere where some might consider like, these are all fucking war stories. You're talking about this shit that keeps people sick.
Yeah, well, I never was under the belief that war stories keep people sick. Like, I was never under that belief, and I totally do my best to keep it separate. When I talk to my sponsor about Dopey and traditions, he's like, you can say you're in AA, you just can't say somebody else is in AA.
Right.
You're allowed to share whatever you want. I keep my recovery separate from Dopey because Dopey is a show. It's not recovery. It's a podcast. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be entertaining. And it's created community, which is amazing. Like, there's these weird blurred lines. Like, recovery has community and Dopey has community. But recovery is all about spiritual principles and surrender, and Dopey is all about interviews and laughs.
Yeah.
So like, the connection is community and subject matter. Recovery is important within Dopey, but in my recovery, like, I always wanted to be spiritual, and I was never spiritual until I got to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, I had no ability to be spiritual, and I've learned every bit of my spirituality. I've learned how to practice my spirituality through 12-step, and I can't even believe like the life that 12-step gave me. And when we started Dopey, like, I talk shit about it all the time because I hated hearing that shit. I hated hearing about somebody who owes their life to Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever. And then it turns out, it's like, I don't like the phrase, but it turns out, like, if you actually practice the principles, you're praying, you're meditating, you're doing service, and you don't have to call it Alcoholics Anonymous. You can call it living a good life. You can call it trying to be a good person. But like, that's what it's given me. And Dopey is definitely not that. Dopey is not that.
That's cool.
Since we're running out of time, rapid fire?
Yeah.
All right. So we like to wrap things up with something we call rapid fire question time.
It's rapid fire question time.
I'll start us off. So Ben and Jerry's comes to you. They say, Dave, man, you've done such amazing work in your life. We want to do a Dave signature flavor. What do you want to put in it, and what do you want to call it?
Well, I actually submitted a flavor to Ben and Jerry's before Dopey. It was called Pat's Crispy Kindness, and it was vanilla ice cream with dark chocolate covered Rice Krispie treats with a swirl of fudge. But since then, like, we know that a Rice Krispie treat frozen will break your teeth. So like, I don't know. Like, I think for me, I'm so happy with Haagen-Dazs vanilla chocolate chip. I would say vanilla chocolate chip with a stripe of fudge and some brownies and some peanut butter. How was that?
Killer.
That's good.
Killer.
And what's it called?
It's called Dopey.
All right. Okay, so
It's called Dopey dessert.
Time travel vacation. You could go to any time, era, place, time and place. Where would you go?
I would go to London or San Francisco in 1968 and a half.
Nice. All right. How many days have you been sober?
I don't know.
Take a guess.
I don't know.
Throw a number.
3,000.
All right.
We'll
check
But I'm
the
not
math
good
later.
at math.
We'll check the
I'm
math
not
later.
good at math.
Have you ever had a supernatural experience? Any sort of Bigfoot, alien encounters, UFOs, drones. You're close to New Jersey, right? Drones.
There's tons of drones. I see drones every day. There's drones everywhere. They're not supernatural though.
No, I know.
Nothing really. I mean, I've had no, nothing really. Nothing worth sharing. I let me think.
That's
there
my
was
favorite answer to that.
Oh, I have a ghost story.
Okay.
I have a ghost story. When I was a kid at summer camp, I was a scared kid. And I remember one night I woke up in the middle. I was terrified of everything. But one night I woke up in the middle of the night and there were these kids on the floor toilet papering another kid, like wrapping him up in toilet paper. And I got out of bed and I went up to the kids and I said, "Who are you getting?" And they didn't answer me. And I said, "Who are you getting?" And I went to tap the kid's shoulder and my hand went through the kid.
No.
And I don't know if it happened or if I dreamed it, but it was really, 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 really real. It was scary.
Oh, man.
I'm scared now.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I'm scared too. Let's go watch Pulp Fiction and feel better.
All right. Last question. You know,
Yeah.
you're having a rough day. You're in the malady. You know, you're feeling, and what music is your go-to to get you back into like the right emotional?
I'm a music freak. The music that has helped me most of late, currently, it's live Louis Armstrong on the sunny side of the street, but really live Louis Armstrong and a song called When It's Sleepy Time Down South. That's the song that does it for me.
I gotta look that one up because I'm a big Louis Armstrong guy, and lately I've only been listening to live albums.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Dude, check out, these are the 3 songs to listen to.
All right.
When It's Sleepy Time Down South, Rocking Chair, and On the Sunny Side of the Street live. Fucking, you'll be happy.
In
for
the
that.
car right now.
There we go.
right,
The last
very
thing we
good.
like to do before we wrap up is give you the floor. So, you know, where can people find you? What do you want to promote? What do you want to throw out there for everyone?
Thank you guys for having me. Just if anyone wants to hear a different podcast about drugs, addiction, and dumb shit, check out the Dopey podcast.
All right, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, for sharing with us. You know, thank you to you, our loyal listeners, wherever you watch us, whether it be YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music or whatever. You know, don't forget to like, share, follow, tell your friends, tell your mama.
Comment, rate.
Rate.
all.
Yeah. All that.
Can I
kind of
ask a
stuff.
question
Yeah,
real quick?
Yeah.
Jason sent me a link, the parents surviving the kid's addiction, and it's with Nancy Mraz.
That's my
right?
mom.
Your last name is Mraz?
I'm not Jason Mraz.
No, his last name's Cabello.
My last name is Cabello, but my mom, people mistake because they were in the music business. So we got a lot of calls when the Jason Mraz out. Is that where you're going around to? Doubling back to Jason Mraz?
Yeah, I'm like, where's Jason Mraz in this whole thing? But
So
it's
I'm
your
Jason Mraz, and I actually met Jason Mraz one time at a party in Miami. And I was like, listen, my stepdad was a record engineer named Barry Mraz. And people thought when your album came out that, and he was like, I've gotten that question before. Barry Mraz was my dad. So.
Actually, when I decided I was done with the fedora, I sent it to Jason Mraz.
I don't know.
And he wears it.
Is that a joke or is that
It's a joke.
Is that a joke or is that
yeah.
true?
But thank you again, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, listeners. Don't forget to like, follow, and share. And as we like to say here, there's 1,000 ways in.
There's 1,000 ways out.
And we hope you find yours.